Antibiotics. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about antibiotics in our livestock. So firstly, why do we use antibiotics? Exactly the same ways as they're used in humans. They are used to treat symptoms for infections and problems in livestock. So what will happen is if we have an animal that doesn't look very good, we will be able to assess then whether we need to give it antibiotics. Antibiotics can be used in animals that are going to go into the food chain, and what happens is on the bottles they have withdrawal periods. So when you've administered the antibiotic to the animal, you then have to follow the guidelines of the time. Most of the time it's 28 days to something like 48 days, give or take. I mean, I read the bottle, but you cannot then sell the animal until after these times. What happens is the antibiotics is then naturally released from the body over that time, and then it won't be present in the meat when you eat. We work incredibly closely with our vets, and every single year we have an annual inspection. This is to check the cleanliness, the husbandry of the farm, and also to get a special accreditation number so we can export animals if we wish. This is all done with your local vets. Also, in these times, we discuss treatments, antibiotics, and the use, including we talk a lot about working with the vets about antibiotic resistance. So that's something we're really very keen on promoting, making sure that antibiotics continue to work in the future, because the resistance was becoming a big problem. So what is antibiotic resistance? Historically in animals, because the profit margins have been so low, farmers would just administer antibiotics as a precaution. It was quite common in things like baby lambs. You would give them a watery mouth tablet, it was called, and it's prevalent everywhere, because the worry would be that your animals would just get infections, or you could put antibiotics in the feed and things like this. So it would just blanket treat every animal whether they needed the antibiotic or not. So it's quite difficult these days, because what that did alleviate was any judgment. So you didn't actually have to check on them or anything like that. You could just blanket feed or inject or whatever antibiotics. So then most of the time it would control diseases. But one of the biggest problems with that now is you've got resistance to these antibiotics. So it's no different to what's happening in the human population. So we now work with our vets to use antibiotics on a basis of when necessary. So what happens is we will speak to the vets and see if they agree with us before we administer certain antibiotics. The only things we might give routinely would be if a sheep had a really hard assisted lambing, or if an animal had a really big injury or something like that. We would give antibiotics as a precaution in those cases, because they often do lead to infections, and sometimes when the infection has taken hold of the animal, it's too late. So in those cases we use antibiotics without looking for symptoms, but in every other aspect of our animal husbandry we don't. And that is so we don't dilute the resistance pool of all the animals, because all you're going to do by giving them more antibiotics is making their bodies more used to them, and then their offspring will be more used to them, and their offspring are more used to them, and then before you know it, you've got resistance to these antibiotics, and you can't treat with really bad problems. On the farm at the moment, I use two kinds of antibiotics. One's called alleimycin and one's called Trimox, we call it. I think it's called like trimoxicillin. We are given these by our vet. Again, like I said, we work with our vets as to what kind of thing we need. And it's really good at clearing up general problems in animals. So we have these on the farm, on hand, ready to give to the livestock when and as they're needed. But like I've said before, we work with our vets before we do so. So to conclude, we use antibiotics on the farm. We use it to treat animals when they're in a bad way, on vets' advice, and as little as possible. Antibiotics will not be in your food, because we've always taken the precautions and measures for the meat withdrawal periods before they're sent to the abattoir. Most of the time, The issues are in the breeding stock, which you don't eat anyway. That's mainly what we'd say in our case. So when you hear about antibiotic use in UK British food, don't worry about it, because we work very hard to make sure that antibiotics stay effective, but we also work very hard to make sure they don't end up in the food chain.